What's up everybody? It's Greg Peters with the Car Passion channel here, and today, at long last, I will be attempting to install the Nitrous system on my 1999 Mazda Miata, aka Project Too Soon, Junior. So with me here on the table, I've got a bunch of nitrous related parts, and I will be going over what each one of these components does or how it works, and then I'll attempt to install the system on the Miata and get it working. And the reason I say attempt is because I've never done anything nitrous related on any of my cars, so you and we're going to be learning this stuff together. Now, if there are any nitrous veterans in the comment section, please correct any mistakes I might make in these videos. You know, I'm going to do my research, but I'm not perfect. And despite the history of my channel, I don't actually want to blow things up on purpose. So we're going to try to get this right. We're going to try to make some good power. And for now, let's go ahead and jump into the garage and talk about what the heck all this stuff is. Now, before I jump into the nitrous system that I bought for the Miata, I want to talk briefly about what nitrous oxide even is. I feel like most of the people watching probably have a pretty good grasp on that, but I want to cover it anyways. So the key to making more power out of an engine is getting more air into that engine. That's the reason turbochargers and superchargers are so effective at making more power. So think of it like this. This much air will create a certain amount of energy when it's burned. This much air has much more energy in it, but the engine can't pull this much air in on its own. So what a turbocharger or a supercharger does is it takes this much air, compresses it down into this size, and then it fits into your engine and you get the benefit of all that extra power without having a bigger engine. Nitrous oxide kind of accomplishes the same thing. It's a compressed version of nitrogen and oxygen, and because it's compressed, a lot more of it is able to fit into your engine. So it's basically like carrying around a big tank of extra air, and when you want extra power, you just spray some of it into your engine, inject the correct amount of fuel to go with it, and kaboom. Well, kaboom as in more power, not kaboom as in there goes my engine, hopefully anyways. But that's the basic idea on it. If you want to learn more about it, of course, there are a bajillion YouTube videos that go in depth on how nitrous works, but that's not really what this is about. Today is about getting the system installed on the Miata, so let's do just that. So of course, we need to start off with the star of the show, the heart of the system, and that would be the Nitrous Express license plate frame. See, it's important for me to advertise to the world that my Miata is now slightly less slow and should be able to walk the majority of local mopeds. Seriously though, here is the nitrous bottle itself. It is a 10-pound bottle, and they do come in smaller sizes, but I wanted the biggest one I could realistically fit in the Miata's trunk while still having room for an array of hairstyling products. It's masked off in this shot because I have a very special paint job planned that I'll be getting to later in the video. Next, let's check out the rest of the base kit. What you're looking at here is a universal dry nitrous kit, which means it includes the bare minimum components for injecting solely nitrous oxide into the engine's throttle body. Now, I tried to rip this open like a kid on Christmas due to my excitement, but since the packaging is quite childproof, I struggled with it for several minutes while considering a gym membership. Oh my god. Are you serious? Anyways, here's a good look at the group of parts, and yes, I waited 2 years to open this stuff so I could unbox it with you guys on camera. Up first, there are the bottle mounts that will be going into the trunk. This is a nitrous solenoid which allows nitrous to flow from the bottle into the engine when 12 volts is applied to it. Here we have the main relay, which allows you to power the solenoid without having the solenoid itself pulling big amperage through the nitrous trigger. And I'll be going into more detail on all this stuff as it actually goes into the car, so it'll make a little more sense. This is the nitrous arming switch, a bag of miscellaneous hardware and connectors, a wide open throttle switch in case you're using the throttle body itself to trigger the nitrous, which I am not, but I'll get into that later as well. These are component mounting brackets. This is the nitrous fogger that goes into your intake, and it includes these 2 large nuts in case yours aren't big enough to handle nitrous. Just kidding, making sure you're paying attention. These two large nuts are in case you're putting the fogger into a plastic intake boot, but the fogger itself is also 1/8 NPT threaded, so you can use it in a welded bung inside of an aluminum intake as well. Here's the main line that will run from the bottle to the nitrous solenoid, and it's got enough length whether you're installing it into a Miata or an adult size car. This smaller line runs from the solenoid to the fogger in the intake, and here are the various nitrous jets, which include sizes ranging from 35 up to 150 horsepower. Here you can see the difference between the 35 and 150 horsepower jets. Yes, you heard that correctly, the bigger one can flow more horsepower than a stock Miata engine, and these get installed like so into the fogger. Now for the small amount of nitrous I plan on using, combined with the not so serious manner I plan on using it in, a purge is really not that necessary in my opinion. But there's no way in the name of Gallo 24s was I going to install a nitrous system without a purge valve, because the street cred this will provide far outweighs the work of installing it. A purge valve allows you to purge the air between the bottle and the main nitrous solenoid, ensuring that when nitrous is actually triggered, it gets into the engine as quickly as possible. This is controlled by a simple push button and can mount directly to the main nitrous solenoid. It even includes this completely useless 5-inch piece of hardline that would allow you to purge inside of the engine bay where nobody can see, completely defeating the main purpose of the purge valve, which is to show off to random pedestrians. Now to accessorize the bottle, I got a pressure gauge because bottle pressure greatly affects how the system performs and can alter the tune quite a bit. I also got an electric bottle opener, since my use case for a nitrous system in a daily driver will be mostly random encounters, so when I want to crack a very cold one for the boys, I can do so with just the flip of a switch. Side note here, I bought this part from Amazon and it was missing some random terminals, so I returned it and bought another one to find the same parts missing. Kind of a bummer considering it's a $300 part, but I guess that's what I get for buying it from Amazon. Now originally I was going to upgrade the injectors in the Miata and control the extra fueling via ECU tuning, but that does introduce more complication to the tuning process, and the Motorsport Electronics ECU doesn't have a nitrous module yet, so what I did was buy a dry to wet conversion. This includes all of the parts to turn your dry nitrous system into, you guessed it, a wet nitrous system. All this means is that I will be tapping into the stock fuel system and injecting fuel into the throttle body along with nitrous oxide, allowing me to keep the fuel injector stock and leave the fuel map in the ECU alone. Which means technically you can do all of this with a stock ECU. But I recommend waiting for the dyno tune video before you start buying parts, as I have no idea how that's going to go and what other knowledge I might be able to provide to prospective nitrous purchasers. The dry to wet conversion kit includes a fuel solenoid. This will allow fuel to flow from your stock fuel lines into the fogger at the same time as the nitrous, and this will be triggered by that same relay from earlier, so both solenoids are sure to be triggered at the same exact time. You get a couple short lines to run from your fuel system to the solenoid and then from the solenoid to the fogger, along with some fittings, a solenoid mounting bracket, a T in case your car uses rubber 8mm fuel lines, and another fogger, except this one is a dual feed, since we'll be blasting fuel and nitrous into the intake manifold. It also comes with an array of fuel jets, and this is what I'll be using to fine-tune the AFR while nitrous is being injected. Now, since I have a 99 Plus Miata, that means it features a quick disconnect fuel system, so I'll need a clever way to tee in the additional fuel line, since you can't just cut these factory lines and use a barb fitting. I bought some quick disconnect to 8mm barb conversion fittings, which was a great thought, but the male fitting did not work at all with the Miata type connectors, so I had to buy this long boy, which ended up working out great in the end. Deep breath. We're not done yet, boys, but we're almost there. This is a very special delivery from my friends over at Nap Motorsports. It is a custom fabricated intake, which includes threaded bungs not only for a GM style air intake temperature sensor, but a nitrous fogger as well. It also locates the filter at the back of the engine bay on the intake side, rather than being sandwiched between the headers and the radiator the way my old intake was. Now, Nap Motorsports does all kinds of custom fabbed parts, so if you're interested in a custom intake like this, or possibly a nice TIG welded aluminum curling iron holster for your interior, slide into Nap's DMs and see what they can fab up for you. I'll link their information down below in the description. Now, this intake also came with a bit of a challenge. See, in an upcoming video, Nap and I will have a virtual drag race between my Nitrous powered stock motor and their fully built cammed high compression screamer, so that should be interesting. But because of this challenge, I just had to make sure they didn't weld some kind of restrictor into this thing to reduce my power down to 1.6 levels, but looks like we're all clear. Now, all in all, this whole setup was about $1,500. I bought everything brand new, mostly from Summit Racing and a couple bits from Amazon. If you were to skip the bottle opener and just buy a wet kit instead of buying the two kits separately like I did, you should be able to put it all together for around $1,000. But anyways, that is enough talk. Let's get on to the install. First, I want to get the bottle test mounted after clearing out my trunk, which appears to be full of junk. I also got this super clean looking battery cover from DCBE, which is a direct replacement for the stock particle board unit that usually disintegrates over time or just goes missing entirely. But once I mocked it up, I realized that it's kind of in the way of where I want to mount the bottle, so I decided not to use it. But if you're looking for a replacement for your NB's battery cover, I'll link this part down below in the description. I've got another special part from DCBE going into the new motor for the red NA, but that'll be showcased when the time comes. In order to set up the bottle mounts, first secure them to the bottle. Then place the bottle into the car, taking into consideration any accessories that will be attached to the bottle upon final assembly. When you're choosing how to position the bottle, if possible, it's best that you point the valve towards the front of the car and point the outlet of the bottle towards the ground. This will position the pickup tube inside of the bottle at the best angle to feed nitrous as the bottle becomes more empty and as the nitrous moves inside of the bottle during acceleration. Mark the bracket holes with a Sharpie and proceed with the weight reduction. Please use caution here and don't accidentally drill holes into your muffler. If you're mounting the bottle into the trunk of an NB Miata, you'll likely run into the heat shield, so that will need to be removed before you install the hardware. Reinstallation later is at your discretion. The bottle mounts will live in the trunk like this, but before securing them, I really wanted to clean up this trunk area a bit more. Now, my UK boys will relate with me on this one because I'm going to start by vacuuming the rust out of the trunk. Follow that up with a bit of purple power, a scrub, and a light spray down with the body plugs removed, and please, if you do this, make sure your battery is not present during the process. Now that it's clean and dry, I put a giant diaper on the back of the car and hit the inside of the trunk with some good old roll cage paint. The bottle will get the same treatment with some black primer, but we are not done yet, folks, because next up, we're going orange. I know it's a bit of an odd color choice for a green car, but you'll see where I'm going with this momentarily. Now here's where it all comes together. I honestly cannot say this could have come out any better. I mean, would you just look at it? This label was made for me by my friends at Push to Start Design. I'll link their store down in the description in case you want to check out some of the fun decals and other products this enthusiast-owned company has to offer. Now, even though it's completely dark out, I have to see what this thing looks like in the trunk of the Miata, and it is absolutely hilarious. I could not be happier with how it came out. Well, that was until I sent a picture to my group chat and someone immediately pointed out the fact that I missed a perfect pun with this bottle. How? How could I miss this? The worst part is I know a bunch of people in the comments would be pointing it out too, and I couldn't let that happen. I thought about it for days, and finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I had the label redesigned and reprinted. Now this, my friends, this is perfection. And this is the world's spiciest nitrous setup. Anyways, now that the bottle is in, I can run the main nitrous feed line from the trunk to the engine bay. I ran this underneath the parcel shelf, down the waterfall panel, and along the outer edge of the passenger seat and up to the firewall. This will all be completely tucked away under the carpet later, and you won't be able to see anything inside the car. I drilled a bit of a hole in the firewall, which I will have to fix up later with some kind of rubber protection for that line. And since the location of the hole is in front of some sound deadening and I made it as small as possible, it was a bit tricky to get the line through, but I just fished a long screwdriver down into the footwell, taped the nitrous line to it, and then pulled the line itself up to the hole where I could grab it lightly with some pliers and get it through. Next, I test fitted the Nap Motorsports intake and started to figure out where I would have room to mount the solenoids, which direction they would face, line routing, etc. Since I've deleted basically everything from this side of the engine bay, it made the job much easier to keep it clean, but even if you still have a completely stock engine bay, all of these components are pretty small, so it shouldn't be too difficult to figure out where to put everything. Now we can begin the final assembly of the various parts before they get permanently installed in the engine bay. I'll be mounting the purge solenoid directly to the main nitrous solenoid, and for that I'll use the included union fitting, and all of the fittings here will be getting some high temperature liquid thread sealer. The fitting itself will run between the purge port on the main solenoid and the nitrous in port on the purge solenoid. On the purge port of the purge solenoid, you'll need to thread in one of the included NPT plugs. For the purge line, you'll use what's called a brass compression sleeve and either the included hard line, or you could do what I did, which is buy a much longer section of 3/16 stainless brake line so I could route the purge line outside of the engine bay for maximum street cred. To connect the hard line, just slip it through all three parts of the fitting, and when you tighten it down, it will crush the brass sleeve, which locks the line in place and creates a seal. Now, I'm not going to do that quite yet because I'll be setting up the purge line once I put this whole setup inside the engine bay. Next, find the fitting with the tiny screen inside of it, and this is going to be your nitrous feed fitting. That gets installed into the nitrous in port of the main nitrous solenoid. The last fitting goes on the out port of the main solenoid, and now it's ready to be bolted into the engine bay. I used some good old self-tapping screws to mount the bracket right next to the shock tower, then secured the solenoid with the provided hardware and hooked the feed line up to the nitrous in port. Remember, you're working with mostly aluminum here, which is pretty soft, so they don't need to be super tight in order to achieve a good seal. Next, I'll thread in the short line that will run between the nitrous solenoid and the intake. Side note, for aesthetics, you can actually loosen the lower nut on the solenoids and rotate the sleeves around so that the NX stickers are all facing the same direction, which is a nice touch in my opinion. If you have a wet kit, you'll also have a fuel solenoid to configure, which is pretty easy as well. I will not be using any type of fuel purge, so that port can get an NPT plug. For the other two fittings, one is slightly larger than the other, and the larger one threads into the fuel in port, while the smaller one goes into the out port. I mounted the fuel solenoid in the same way as the nitrous solenoid right to the shock tower, and threaded on the line that will run to the intake. Next, it's time to tap into the stock fuel system. Now, if you have a 90 through 97 Miata or any car that uses normal rubber fuel lines, this step is as simple as cutting a high pressure line and installing the provided T. But as I mentioned earlier, the 99 Plus Miata is a bit more tricky with its quick disconnect system. You'll need some 7.9 or 8mm high pressure EFI fuel line to be able to set up a T like this with a male and female quick disconnect fitting at either end. After relieving pressure from the fuel system, use a quick disconnect tool to remove one of the car's fuel lines, attempt to install your new T, and realize that the fittings you just waited a week for are not compatible with the Miata connectors. Proceed to hop on Amazon and order a long style male quick disconnect to barb fitting like this, and move on to something else. That thing will be setting up the fogger and the feed lines on the intake. The opening of the fogger should be facing the general direction of airflow in the intake, so remember that as you're threading it in. These are tapered NPT threads, so you can just tighten it until it starts to snug up, then just keep going until the fogger is facing the direction you need it to. Now, I did run into a bit of an interference issue with the nitrous fogger and the stock fans. This will likely be completely irrelevant to anyone watching this because even if you have Nap build you the same exact intake, they can just change the location of the fogger port slightly to avoid this. But I just like to show everything that goes into the process because things will not always work out perfectly. I just had to Dremel a bit of plastic off of the stock fan shroud to make it work. Now the feed lines can be hooked up to the fogger, and just for test fitting purposes, I'm not installing the jets yet, but don't forget to do that before you actually run the nitrous, because I'm pretty sure that would be like a 1,000 horsepower shot. And you know what they say? In this world, only three things are certain: death, taxes, and your connecting rods going into orbit if you forget to install your nitrous jet. Yeah, nitrous is serious business, and I'm going to do my best to keep my rods inside the motor rather than on NASA's registry for space debris. To make sure the lines stay out of the fan, I used a couple of these rubber-coated straps to hold them in place, and it actually looks pretty clean. Now I can hop back onto the fuel solenoid setup. So here's my revised fuel system T, and everything fits perfectly this time around. The line from the T gets hooked up to the in port of the solenoid, and I used another rubber-coated strap with a factory threaded hole to hold that in place. Now it's street cred time, boys. I got my roll of 3/16" brake line, and it's time to set up that purge. My idea here is to have the purge run diagonally across the windshield because I think it'll look cool, but I'll have to put that to the test later. I drilled a small hole in the cowl and cut a piece of brake line to size with a fancy tubing cutter that's not at all necessary for the job. You can just use a hacksaw or a Dremel and you'll be fine. Just make sure the line isn't crushed at the end where you made the cut. Now, this stuff is plenty soft enough so that you can bend it by hand or with pliers. Just make sure your bends are gradual and don't kink the line. This looked a little obnoxious at first, but I got the bright idea of slipping a piece of vacuum line over it, which made it not only fit better into the cowl, but also made it look more stealth.
Talented, brilliant, incredible, amazing, show-stopping, spectacular, never the same, totally unique, completely not ever been done before.
Now moving on to the bottle opener. Here's what the kit comes with. They give you these nice bullet connectors, which are supposed to live inside of this quality weatherproof plug, and for some reason the matching female bullet connectors were not included. But it's not that big of a deal, and I'll address that later. First, pop the plastic cover off of the hand opener, and if your bottle is full of nitrous, you definitely want to install the included cap here so you don't end up looking like Raiden losing a fight to Sub-Zero. Next, remove the nut and open the valve all the way before pulling the knob off. This ensures the correct clearance when installing the new knob. Now install the lower collar of the electric opener. The cutout should be facing the nitrous outlet like so, and then this gets secured by a single Allen bolt. Next, install the new opener knob with the original nut that you just took off. And side note here, make sure you check the nut after cycling the bottle open and closed a few times. Mine came loose after about 5 to 10 cycles, but after retightening it once, I haven't had any issues since. Next, slide the drive motor assembly over the knob, and you might have to rotate it back and forth a little bit to get the parts to mesh. You don't want to force this on. Once it's fully seated, tighten the thumb screw just by hand. You don't need to tighten it too much. It makes it so you can easily remove the opener when needed. I'll also include the PDF instructions in the description for all the parts I'm dealing with today. The last part of prepping the bottle is adding a pressure gauge. Now, the pressure in the bottle directly affects how much nitrous is injected into the engine, i.e. a 50 horsepower jet will make more power at 1100 psi versus 800 psi. The engine will also run leaner when the bottle pressure is higher. It's for this reason that a bottle heater is highly recommended. These will slowly and safely heat up the bottle to maintain the correct pressure by using a pressure transducer to automatically turn on and off. I didn't buy a heater at first, but foreshadowing, after I saw my bottle pressure fluctuate by over 400 psi between night and day, I ordered one. It's very beneficial for tuning and consistent power delivery. Now we arrive at the bit that I've not been looking forward to at all, and that is wiring the whole system up. I mounted the relay for the fuel and nitrous solenoids to the firewall on an unused stud, but you can mount this thing anywhere with the magic of self-tapping screws or an existing threaded hole. I wanted to keep all the components relatively close to each other so I could minimize running wires everywhere and keep the install clean. Aside from the bleed connectors that were already included with the kit, I also bought a spool of automotive wire, some expandable protective sleeving, adhesive heat shrink crimp connectors, and other various electrical supplies, which I'll link down in the description. I also drew up a wiring diagram that's essentially the same as what you can find online, but I find that making one myself really helps me plan out the system better. I also made this wire list so I could figure out the minimum number of wires that I needed to run between the trunk and the engine bay and the center console. I know it seems like a lot, but you just gotta take it one wire at a time and you'll be fine. I started by just getting some wires to head in the right direction. I put some harness sleeving on the wires for the fuel and nitrous solenoids and ran them back towards the main relay. I also put a sleeve on the harness for the relay itself. And next I made up a little harness to run between the engine bay and the center console, and thanks to my wire list, I know I only need 4 wires to run from the switches to the engine bay for everything to function. Those 4 wires would be a switched 12 volt, a ground, a purge, and a nitrous arm. Now the relay itself needs a constant 12 volt power source, which I got from the main lug inside of the fuse box. This wire should have an inline fuse, something that looks like this, but for today's video, I just don't have one laying around, so I'll have to test it without one. Now keep in mind that the different kits may use different wire colors, so be sure to follow the provided instructions with your kit rather than just blindly following the guidance in this video. But in my kit, the black wire from the relay is the constant 12 volt power, and the green wire is power to the nitrous and fuel solenoids. When the relay is triggered, it will allow power to flow from the 12 volt source to the solenoids, causing them to open. Now the relay trigger ground, which is white here, will go to a pin on my ECU, which is a switched ground, and that'll be controlled by parameters that I set up in the tuning software. I'll get to the ECU stuff in a little bit, but just know that when this wire is grounded, that will trigger the relay and open the solenoids. And the red wire gets hooked up to the nitrous arming switch. Now I'll run my 4-wire harness from earlier through the hole in the firewall, right along with the nitrous feed line, and then I'll run those up through the glove box area out to the CD player, which is where my switches will live. Now, what I originally thought was a CD changer appears to be, I guess, a CD holder, and there are no wires attached to it, which made it really easy. I just pulled it out by hand. In order to install the switch panel, first I must make a switch panel. So I took some quick measurements and cut out a cardboard mock-up. Yeah, so it's mint, and it actually matches the interior a little too well. I mean, this is SEMA quality right here, let's be honest. Anyways, onto the final production plate. I took measurements of all the switches, drilled some holes into a piece of ABS plastic, and cut out a plate based on the dimensions of my cardboard, and would you look at that, it's beautiful. Well, it needs some black paint, but I'll take care of that later. Now let's wire up the switches so they're prepped to connect to our 4 main wires running from the engine bay, and a couple that'll be running to the trunk for the opener. The opener is the switch I want to start with here because it's the biggest pain. It's 6 pins just to be able to open and close the bottle. So basically it's 2 circuits right next to each other, both of which are normally open, and depending on which way you press the switch, one of these circuits will be completed and power is sent to one of the poles on the opener, causing the nitrous bottle to open or close. It did not come with blade connectors, so I ended up just directly soldering the wires, and I have the 2 switched 12 volt pins and 2 ground pins wide together, and then I have 1 wire left for each pole on the opener. The nitrous arming switch will have a switched 12 volt wire and a ground, and then a 3rd wire that will run from the switch itself up to the relay trigger. That's the red wire on the relay from earlier. Now I know this is getting a little confusing, but in a nutshell, the switch sends power to the trigger circuit of the main relay. When that circuit becomes grounded, which is controlled by the ECU, it will trigger the nitrous. So the arming switch needs to be on, and the ECU has to ground the circuit in order for nitrous to be triggered. It can't just be one or the other. Next up is the purge switch, and this is the easiest one. The switch just interrupts the purge circuit, and when you hold the button, the circuit is completed and the purge solenoid opens. So now the panel is looking great. It's full of switches, and I also painted it along with my thumb, and it's ready to get wired into the car. I pre-labeled all of those wires to make it easy on myself, so I'm going to start with the ground. Everything that needs to be grounded, I gathered all up, and it will be grounded to a single point on the back of the intake manifold. That would be one for the nitrous solenoid, one for the fuel solenoid, and then the single wire going to all the switches inside the cabin. Next, I hooked up a switched 12 volt. Now these can be found all around the Miata's engine bay and are easily identifiable as white wires with a red stripe. I used one from my EGR solenoid plug, which may or may not be deleted. Please don't show this video to the state of California.
FBI, open up!
Anyways, there are only 2 wires that need to be switched 12 volt. That is one going to the purge solenoid and the single 12 volt wire going to the switch panel. If you don't have a digital multimeter by now, please buy one. I'll link the one I'm using down in the description below, but there are also way cheaper ones that get the job done just fine. And that is it for the engine bay wiring. So I wrapped everything up in this harness sleeve and tried to make it somewhat presentable. Next up, I ran a harness consisting of 2 wires from the trunk up to the switch panel. These are the wires that will control the electric bottle opener. I ran them with the nitrous feed line and then up to the switch panel to make those final 2 connections. And now I'll just easily install the switch panel without any issues whatsoever. and all I have to do at this point is hope that everything is wired correctly.
That's not good. I wonder what's up with that.
I still laugh every time I look at the bottle. Anyways, I'm gonna install the bottle and temporarily wire up the opener just to see if it works. I still need to find a plug of some sort so I can easily disconnect the opener if necessary. Now the bottle is empty, but we can test everything out for the most part to see what works.
Okay, so that completes the final electrical connection of the entire Nitrous system. I wanted to do this IRL rather than with voiceover because this is nerve-wracking. Did you all see how many wires that was? First step is to put the negative on and hope the car doesn't immediately just burst into flames. We're gonna do it together. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Okay. Don't see any smoke. It's a good sign. All right. Guess I'll I'll turn the key to on. Okay, this is scary, dude. I still don't like electrical. Even though I'm confident that I followed everything correctly, it's still scary. Okay, ready? 1, 2, 3. Okay. Literally holding my breath. Should I do something? Ooh. The purge works. That's not good. Okay, so that does not illuminate. I'm guessing... Hold on. I might have forgot to plug my ECU in. Hold up. Okay, I had forgotten to plug the ECU in. Let's go back to key on. Oh, I heard the fuel pump that time. There we go, now there's actually a reading there. No active light. How about this bad boy? Yo! Very nice, very nice. Bottle opener works. I think I'll just put in the tune so it would trigger the solenoids just sitting, just if I floor it, and then we'll listen and see if they work. Let's give that a try. Let me go get my laptop.
So I connected my laptop and randomly for the first time ever, it would not connect to the ECU. But I quickly found out that I had pulled a wire apart at a joint in my tuning cable while I was messing around with the ECU, and it was a really tiny wire. But the show must go on, so I made an emergency repair, and to my great surprise, the ECU was now connected.
I mended something!
And before any tests, I'll install the jets. On the nitrous side, I'll use the 35 horsepower jet, which is the smallest. And on the fuel side, I installed the correct sized fuel jet based on the chart provided by Nitrous Express. Once the jets are slipped into the fogger, reinstall the lines. As far as the tuning itself, since ME442 does not have a nitrous module, I'm using the water injection module to trigger the nitrous. So eventually I'll have this set to start spraying only when above 85% throttle and above 4,700 RPM. Spraying only at a higher RPM is easier on the engine, and when doing a pull, the car never drops below 4,700 anyways, so it'll be able to spray consistently through multiple gears. Well, depending on how hard I want to push that stock ring gap.
Now me and the mad scientist gotta rip apart the block and replace the piston rings you fried.
Oh yeah, and one thing I forgot to mention, the only reason the LED was not turning on the arming switch is because I had the switch 12 volt on the ground backwards, but as you can see, it's all working good now.
Oh my god. Yes, dude. Ooh, I'm scared. This should actually trigger the solenoids. Nope. Oh. Tell you what. That could be a reason why it's not working. I forgot to plug the relay back in. Just now when I pass 30% throttle, we should get some clickage. Ooh. Okay, that actually scared me. But they work. Yes. Oh my god. Yes, it works.
To button up the install, I did add a plug to the opener, and yes, that's a Dean's plug for my RC nerds out there. And I also put a selection of panels back into the trunk, and I think it looks pretty killer. But wait, there's more. Remember that bottle heater that I mentioned earlier? I took so long to edit this video that it arrived. So let's do a brief overview of the heater system. It's got a relay identical to the one that controls the fuel and nitrous solenoids, and that'll be mounted in the trunk, and it's controlled by a switch. The signal from that switch runs through a pressure transducer that will open and close the circuit based on bottle pressure, so it stays within that golden range of about 950 to 1050 psi. Now, I really didn't want to redo my beautiful switch panel, so I decided to just tap into a switched 12 volt and ground wire from the window switch, and then locate the bottle heater switch inside of the cup holder. The only part I haven't done yet is install the pressure transducer into the gauge port, because I already had the bottle filled at this point and it needs to be empty in order to pull that plug. But I still wanted to test out the heater, so I fastened Tapatio Man's little seatbelt and turned it on for a couple minutes. Enjoyed the show through my FLIR thermal imaging camera, which is linked in the description in case you want one for yourself, and saw the bottle go from about 1000 psi to 1050. Sweet. Just don't forget to turn it off if your pressure switch is not installed yet, as the heater will just stay on and keep raising the bottle pressure. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how you install a nitrous system into a Mazda Miata. I think. Obviously, the system has not been fully tested yet, being that the bottle is still empty, but the various things that I could play around with all seem to be working correctly, so I think we're good to go. The next step is going to be getting the bottle filled, and I'll take it out on the street to do some very mild street tuning and testing to make sure that everything actually is functioning the way it should. So that's going to be really fun. That'll be in the next video. My overall impressions of doing a nitrous system install, knowing that I have never done anything with nitrous before, is it did take a little bit longer than I was expecting, actually. If you're gonna install a system like this into a Miata or into any car, definitely do some good planning first, the way that I did, with some diagrams, and know that the universal nitrous system might not fully be able to go into your car. Example being that the 99 plus Miatas have quick disconnect fuel system. So give yourself, I would say, 2 full days to get the system installed. Unless you're doing like a really quick and dirty install, I'm sure you could do it in a couple hours and you just have like wires flying everywhere and stuff like that. The wiring actually did take probably the majority of the time. So if you have any questions, drop them down in the comments below. I'll do my best to answer them. If you learned something, if you enjoyed this video, slap it with a like, and I will see you in the next one. Nitrous Street Tuning.